All right, everybody, welcome to our class for today where we are working with ceramics and clay. Now, a little bit about me. I am a painter and sculptor person first, and a ceramics person barely at all. So we're not going to be going into, the whole physics and chemistry of how ceramics works. We're going to be kind of just getting the basic fundamentals today. So if you are interested after today, make sure you check out the ceramics classes at City College or any college because there's a lot to know. So I won't get into the weeds with it too much today. The reason that we're going to be doing a demo recorded is so that, one, you have access to it later, but two, I can broadcast this better to 45 people than if you're all trying to clamor to see what I'm doing. So to start, I have some basic tools. I have my wood forming tool, which is for forming the clay. I have my hands, and I have clay. You're going to be taking it out of a little container like this, so a little plastic baggie. You'll pull yourself out a little puck like this, and you're going to set it on a baseboard. Right, so my baseboard right here, it's just a little piece of wood. You have them on the ends of your tables. Right there. So you grab your board, and essentially you want this board to be where you do all of the clay work. So it stays on the board. Try to avoid getting it on the table. That will help things stay nice and clean in here. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that you can select your clay. You can cut it with one of these wire cutters, right? And I just pull it down through the center. And that's how I can get a really nice, clean cut. Since we're not working with any kind of flat work today, you can just pinch it and pull it off in little sections. Cool. So another way, if you're trying to get something to be nice and flat, is to use a rolling pin. So I could take a rolling pin and I can roll out my clay so that it's nice and flat. So if you're trying to work with ceramics today in a way where you can create something that's flat on its side, let's say, after I've made my little pinch pot, if I wanted to make, I don't know, a star to go on the side of it, because I'm a drama major, maybe I use a cutting tool to cut into that, and I have myself a nice little pretty funky star. Right, so that's one way to get different shapes to be flat. But for today's purposes, we're working on making a pinch pot. So you want to roll your little pinches of clay into what are known as coils. I call them snakes. Like I said, I used to teach kindergarten. Or slugs. And slugs are smaller little coils, and those come in handy if you need to plug up any cracks or gaps in your ceramic pieces. And we'll talk about that on a more one-to-one basis. I'll come around and look around, and if I'm like, oh, this is a crack, it means there's a gap, and that means oxygen will get in, and that could cause your whole piece to combust. We don't want that. So that's when I'd be like, okay, make yourself a little slug. So that's what I mean when I say snake. This little guy is what I mean when I say a slug. And I'm literally just putting the clay onto the surface and then trying to roll it out in a way that's even. Okay, so you start with a smaller snake or bigger slug, and you roll it so that it comes together in the center like that. Then you can kind of pinch it to smooth it out and bring it together. And then you'll connect the next part of it. Next snake goes around in a little circle, coming around that. And then I'm just going to push it with my thumbs to bring cracks to close, right? Smoothing it over. You can do that part last, toward the end, but eventually what you want is the bottom to have a nice hole in it, and you're going to keep building up snakes around the sides. Okay. And you want it to be nice and even, kind of like a cinnamon roll, right? So I'm just rolling out more. And then you can make your pot as many rings wide as you want. This one only has 3 rings. I would consider going out to like 6 or 7, because when you put a finished clay piece into a kiln, right, it's kind of like an oven, it's what's going to bake your clay, it can shrink the clay up to 20%. So right now this is looking like, okay, this might be like the size of like a teacup. But after you bake it, it's going to come out to be the size of like a shot glass. And you're like, well, that's totally flat, so it's not like a cup at all. Well, that brings me to my next point. Once you've rolled out, you can pre-roll your snakes or you can roll as you go. So let's say I had some pre-rolled snakes, and I wish I did. I can start to stack them and create basically a little wall. Right, so you can see it's starting to come up a little bit. Right, the rings are starting to come off of the ground and up onto the wall. And try to get those snakes to be even in size. I'm doing a very quick and sloppy job for the sake of time. And I'm just going to keep on stacking these. Trying to keep everything even is pretty hard. It just takes some practice. If it breaks off, no big deal. Just start over, rolling it out and adding up. Okay, so let's say my little pinch pot is now 7 rings wide and 10 coils high. Then I'm going to start to smooth out all of the little gaps. Right, so you're just pinching it. And you're trying not to warp it, right? I don't want it to like fall open like that. I want to try to keep everything intact. So you want to make pretty thick snakes, pretty thick coils. About as wide as, what would be a good example? Not quite as wide as a flute, and definitely not as skinny as a pen or pencil. This is a pretty good thickness, maybe a little thicker than that, maybe closer to this, right? Everything shrinks. So then you would just smooth this down. Once you've smoothed down all the surfaces, then you can do what's called scoring. So if I have this completely flat, and let's just say that I do, right, I can't see any more of the cracks. It's all flattened now, including the ones on the bottom. Let's say I wanted to put my star right in the middle. I wanted to attach it to here. I would score the front of my pot. I have a little utensil made with some toothpicks taped together. You can just use one toothpick, you can use a pencil, whatever you want to use. Basically what you're doing is you're scratching into the surface, right? So now I have this kind of scraped little area. And this is essentially creating like a little mud puddle. You can wet your fingers, get yourself a little bowl of water maybe, and then you can scrape the object that you're sticking on. Right, you can use a scraper if you can make one, or you can just scratch into it with a pen or pencil. You can also do little dots instead. Dots are fine as well. Make sure that's nice and wet. Also, this clay is really soft, so it's pretty much already wet and good to go. And basically, I just attach like that. And what that does is it creates a like a glue, like a bonding adhesive, so that the object, once it dries, it won't just fall right off. You have to put that in there so it creates like a suction and like a liquid chemical bond. If you don't do that, once these two pieces harden, even if they stick together, you know, as it is, once your piece hardens, it'll just fall right off. Or when you put it in the oven, it will fall off. Okay? So once you have your whole piece finished, like that, you're going to cover it. And you cover it with plastic. Right? There's little sheets of plastic in a little trash can at the end of your table, the same place where you got your little backboards. You just want to make sure that your piece is well covered. Slip it in, wrap it up. You don't want to smash it, right? So be careful to just pat it down gently and create a nice little covering. That stops air from getting in. It allows it to dry out, but without getting bone dry. So what we're trying to attain is something called leather hardness, which means that this clay is, you know, super, super soft. It's not ready to be thrown into a kiln at all. What you want is, and I'll take you with me, we're going to the damp room right here, and you'll come in here and leave your piece on one of these walls. Okay, I'll show you one of my pieces that's now leather hard and why I want it to become leather hard before I do any of the other cleanup work. Right, so I unwrap my piece. It's this little spoon, and there's some edges that I want to clean up on this. So I'm going to take my ribbon cutting tool, and I'm going to be able to just drag it along the surface here. And I can start cleaning up some of those more lumpy edges. You can also use this tool, the wood forming tool, to kind of form these edges. That's a little bit better to be used when you're in the soft phase, like we're all at today. So I just wanted to introduce these tools to you so that next week we know that we're going to do all the fine tuning and cleaning when our pieces are leather hard, which means when I press on it, it doesn't bend, unlike this clay where when I press on it, it really bends immediately. Okay? So next week we'll work with leather hard clay. This week it's all about getting your super soft clay to be in the position that you want it, and then how to attach some pieces to it, cover it, set it in the damp room so that it can become leather hard for next